A little housekeeping before we move on to the next 3 agenda items. They're all petitions. Not everybody in the audience is familiar with the petition process. Could you help us out there?
Right, just real quickly, what the way the commission works is there's a petition, and the petition is to start regulatory action. And so I just want to make it clear that, well, what the commission is doing is deciding to either start the regulatory process or not start the regulatory process. So a no vote does end whatever the petition sought to have happen. However, a yes vote does not enact any regulations. What it does is this starts the process. And so just to briefly explain it, so if there's a yes vote on one of the petitions, the commission can give some guidance, but generally the staff will work on some language, and then that language will have to go through the what we call the Nevada Administrative Procedures Act, which is in Nevada Revised Statutes Chapter 233B. It has to go through all those steps after the yes vote. So a yes vote today is just the start of the process. It's not enacting anything. So I just wanted to make that clear so that everybody knows that where we are in this regulatory process, because what in the United States, laws have to be enacted in the way that the legislature says they have to be enacted, and that has to be in compliance with the Constitution and all that. And so until we go through all those steps, it's not a law. So I hope that makes clear what the process is and where we are in that process.
Thank you for that.
Can I ask a couple of clarifying questions? Just a couple questions to clarify that. A couple of the resolutions have very specific language in them. If we were to accept one of the petitions with the very specific language, are we bound to only considering that language?
No, because you haven't gone through the Administrative Procedures Act steps, that would be an illegal rulemaking if we were to consider that a law today. Right, even though you've got specific language in front of you, you still have to publish it. You still have to, file it with LCB. You still have to have a workshop. You still have to have a public meeting. You still have to have your vote.
But are we bound to the specific language in the petition,
no,
or does it open the whole section of that NAC?
You can, the concept is you pretty much have to stick with the general concept, but you can change the language all the way up till the final vote. There are some consequences if you change the language at the final vote. But yeah, you can change the language all the way up. I don't know how much you want me to explain that, but when you get to the final vote, let's say it comes up, you have your workshop, you make some changes, they come back for the final vote, you make some more changes, and then you vote. It has to go to the Legislative Council Bureau. They have to look at it. And they basically have to approve the changes that were made in the final vote before the Secretary of State will file it. And it's not final until the Secretary of State files it. See what I mean? So this is the first of many, many steps that you have to go through in the regulatory process. Well, yeah, and because the legislature, we're within the window where the legislature is coming to town. This is only a temporary regulation, so it'll expire November 1st of next year, and you'll have to do it again to make it a permanent regulation.
So if we were to accept the petition, it would start the whole regulation process immediately? That would be the trigger, or?
Well, yes. I mean, it would start the process. But I'm not sure what you mean by trigger. There's no countdown that I know of.
Right. I think what I'm looking at is, my guess is the people that are filing these petitions, and we'll have to ask them, are probably wanting to see this as a permanent regulation.
Well,
so is there a way to go through this one time, or do you have to go through it as a temporary and then back again as a permanent?
Well, it depends how long it takes. I mean, if you start it now, the language in a couple of them are already pretty close to drafted. Comes back for a workshop at your February meeting. I'm not sure how long does publication take. In the water world, we don't do a lot of regulations, so that's why I'm not as up on the regulatory process as I used to be. But it starts the process. I mean, if you're still drafting by, next July, Maureen's the expert, but if you're still drafting by next July and then you have your workshop in July, that's after the blackout period, so that could be a permanent regulation. I know I'm not being specific, but I don't think the Administrative Procedures Act handcuffs you to where just because you start the process now, it has to be a temporary regulation.
So
is that answering your question?
Yeah, and the scheduling of our workshop would be dictated by our agenda, I'm
Yeah,
assuming.
let's not let Maureen's the one that actually does this all the time, so she knows the steps better than I do.
Maureen Hollinger, Nevada Department of Wildlife License Office. If you're just going to work out and iron out all the issues prior to submitting to LCB, then you're okay. If you try to submit right now to LCB, it'll be a temporary regulation. So, if you're going to work out the things and you want it to be permanent, then you'd have to wait till next June to submit because they will start taking draft language, usually the end of May, beginning of June after the session or right toward the end of the session, so that for the start of the next permanent regulation cycle. So, after July 1.
That'd be June of 13.
Correct.
So if we were to accept one of these petitions, could we have a workshop or a committee meeting before we submit it to LCB to try and work through any issues?
You can work at it however often you want and iron out all your issues and how you want the language to read and get some draft language together. But as soon as you submit it to LCB, that determines whether it's temporary or permanent, depending on the time frame that you submit it. Okay.
So in other words, we're not bound to this specific language. If there were things we would have to address that section of the code that this is pertinent to, but we could workshop other items in and combine it before we submit to LCB.
However you want to build it. It's when you submit to LCB determines whether the language is temporary or permanent.
Okay.
Yeah, and Maureen, could you, I know there's a number of days you have to let the LCB look at it before you can take action on it. Do you recall what that is?
Once you submit language to LCB, and then they get you a draft back, if you have changes and you submit it back to them, it starts a 30-day clock again that they have the right to work on it. So every time you submit something to LCB, if you're working the language with them, then it starts the 30-day clock again. So, like those changes that you see in some of these regulations today, those, because you've acted on them, they will have to incorporate those. But if you're in a drafting phase, like I've been with on the falconry regulation, every time I've submitted comments or edits to that back to LCB, I've had to let them have a 30-day clock for them to get it back to me. So the more you can get ironed out before you submit it, the better off you are. Because if you find that there's intent changes that they brought upon the language that you didn't want, and there's significant changes, then they have 30 days to get what you really mean back into the language. So.
Commissioner McNeese.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's one real significant distinction that needs to be made right now, because the implication by the discussion is that language will be moving forward to LCB, and that's not necessarily the case. This board is asking for regulations to be developed to consider and look at. It may very well vote down anything moving forward, and that just ends the process. So there's an assumption that there's something that would have to move forward if we accept this petition, and that's not necessarily the case. This board could vote down any further pursuing any further changes or amendments or modifications to any of the language that's been presented, and that would just end the process. All accepting a petition does is start us down a pathway of looking into something.
And start drafting the language?
Could start drafting, it could be presented, we could get clear down to the end and then vote not to do something, and that would put an end to it. I mean, if I'm mistaken, then now's the time to clear it up, but that's the process.
No, and I hope I said it clearly that a yes vote starts today, starts the regulatory
starts a process, but it does not commit anybody or anything, any entity, this board or anything else, to submitting language to LCB It commits us to looking into the issue and evaluating the proposal and considering the proposal for possible modifications. That's what it does. And I think that's real important for everybody to understand.
And if you say yes, it doesn't mean that February commission meeting, you have to start this process. You know, there may be subcommittees put together, gathering more information, input, whatnot, and establishing a commission meeting somewhere in the future to actually evaluate.
One of the other timeframes that Chief Bonamici just reminded me of too is that there's a 30-day noticing if it's going to be workshopped. So,
Not necessarily workshop, but for the public hearing
yes.
aspect of it, because you can workshop it, I believe, without it. But if you're workshopping with the intent to approve, you got to have your public hearing, which requires a 30-day notice. Clear as mud.
Anything else, Brian? Because then, if not, we're going to move into the petitions. But I think that was a valuable little conversation.
Sorry, no, I don't have anything else unless anybody has any questions.
I think we're good, but I think that helped the commission, the new commissioners, and everybody in the audience see where we're going. So, agenda item number 16, petition for possible action. Lincoln County Advisory Board to Manage Wildlife has petitioned the commission to make it illegal to fly and harass big game and other wildlife at any time of the year for the purpose of hunting or scouting. Corey.
There's handouts for the commission. For the record, Corey Lytle, Lincoln Cab. I apologize. We had some informational stuff, and I had a couple cab members working on that, and they didn't get it to me till the day before I came up. There are some copies in the back if anybody's interested. All it does is kind of spell out some information, some things kind of related to the reason behind this attempt. And I apologize also, the ones in the back aren't colored, so it's a little more difficult to read them. But basically, there's one page that shows our proposal to the NAC, and then the back page is just some informational things. All I want to go into real briefly is the informational side before we start nitpicking the, dotting the I's and crossing the T's, so to speak. It basically is in regard to flying with the use of aircraft for the specific purpose of trying to pre-scout, scout for a hunt, or hunt itself, or collect shed antlers. It's specifically tailored to address some issues that we have, particularly down in our neck of the woods. Start with number one. There's all kinds, and people have observed these types of aircraft, the fixed-wing airplanes, the paraplanes, the power parachutes, and then even as much as people buying helicopters now and using them for this, or renting helicopters to do this. Number two, the most common seasonal times, you're looking at your late winter months, after seasons have generally closed, but before deer and elk shed their antlers. Guys are trying to find pockets of bucks, pockets of bulls, and see where they are in location, kind of, maybe 2 or 3 weeks before they shed their antlers, so they can GPS the areas or go back and pick up the sheds. Early spring's another time when they're dropping their antlers. It's kind of a I guess 2 birds with 1 stone. You can fly an area, spot white antlers very easily, and GPS herds of bucks, and be able to go back and pick up the sheds. And in the summer months, as the antlers are growing and approaching a complete growth period, right before the heritage season start. Okay, this is a reference to NAC. The change we wanted to make is we call it the 48-hour rule. You can basically do that right up until 48 hours before the first big game season. And when you look back, the majority of the flying always occurs when the animals are stressed the most, whether it's the heat of summer or the cold of winter. The animals are just trying to survive winter, and they're constantly getting flown over, harassed in some aspects. Number 3, we want to clarify this because we know there's a lot of questions that have come about. The proposal is not intended to restrict any other forms or methods of flying that are personal, recreational, or professional in nature that do not directly relate to the adopted language already approved in NAC, NAC 503-148. It's language specifically describing the act of flying as it relates to, scouting. That's what we really want to clarify. And then number 4, the primary focus of the proposal is to provide additional protection to our wildlife resource. It's all about the resource. It also promotes a kind of a cultural acceptance in a positive direction as it relates to hunting and the use of aircraft and things like that. Everybody knows the second something happens anymore, it goes out on the internet, whether it's YouTube or something else, and it's viral. And so there's a perception, to be gained by addressing this issue. We basically want to limit harassment, and we want to enhance the idea of a fair chase. Number 5, it just kind of reflects back. I've been involved with, I know these board members have spent countless hours at the department. We're always reflecting on trying to improve and manage deer herds. And in our opinion, this is just one small way to do that. It's a quiet, subtle change. We think it can actually make the NAC that's currently adopted easier to enforce. And I'll be happy to answer any questions. If people have to speak on it, I'll let them speak, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Anybody have any questions of the petitioner? Commissioner Rain?
Have you much idea of the extent of this problem, quantifying it? Because I hear every once in a while of one example here, one example there, but quantifying it.
Personally, I do not. I have a lot of anecdotal references. I get emails, I get phone calls. And matter of fact, maybe Chief Bonamici might even have a better idea of the actual complaints that they receive versus somebody just knowing that it's going on. We do know that it happens on a regular basis, especially in regular areas that hold trophy animals, areas where the access is limited in some respects, areas that there's not a lot of people out there snooping around. And it doesn't happen on the opening day of archery deer season, trust me. It's guys out there on a Tuesday morning, July 15th, they'll fly a mountain range in the morning. It's done. And so quantifying, most of it's anecdotal. I know some guys have videoed them, and there's numerous people that do it, and they're for the most part just doing what they can legally do, and I realize 90% of the time they may not run a deer a quarter of a mile into a thicket where he didn't get a chance to get a drink that morning. It's just one of those things where I think we can take the edges and kind of clean it up a little bit. The honest ones are going to stay honest. There's always going to be the 10%ers that are doing their thing. And maybe Chief Bonamici has a better idea of that.
Then as a follow-up on that, perhaps if there's anybody that thinks that their rights could be precluded by this addition to the regulation, sure like to hear from those folks if there are any.
Hold on. Let's.
At some point.
Yeah, at some point.
At some point.
Any other questions by the commission? Seeing none. Now we'll go to public comment. Come on up.
I'd just like to, Sean White, I'd like to say that I don't think it should happen because it's perfectly legal for the state to fly these bighorn sheep during season. I don't see what the big deal is. I don't think that it happens as much as you think, and I think it should be removed. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Moldy.
Mr. Chairman, Don Moldy-Reno. I support Corey's petition primarily, hopefully, to get it into a workshop situation because I'd like to learn more about this. I suspect that he's onto something, and I speak as someone who has a couple thousand hours of flying low-level terrain in Nevada over 25 years or so, and I used to fly airplanes with very good slow-speed capability and a lot of power, so I have an idea of what could possibly be done by some of these ultralights and newer sport aircraft that would have even more capability than I have. So it sounds like the way the petition is written, it's problematic from a general aviation point of view. There's no question about it. But I think the substance of it has merits. So I support it. I hope that it can move forward into some sort of an investigative preliminary regulation phase so we can take a closer look at it and not dispense of it today. Thank you.
Mr. Reese?
Mike Reese from Southern Nevada Coalition for Wildlife. Our local board, Clark County, we approve this. I believe the merits of what Corey's trying to do is warranted. The only reservation we have is Fraternity of the Desert, Bighorn, some of these other organizations. The only way they get water, material, and stuff up on a lot of mountaintops is flying on a helicopter. That's accepted practice. What we're fear is that somebody's going to see and say, well, there were sheep coming up the hill, and that helicopter came in, and they're starting to bring down guzzlers and putting it in. Well, yeah, it happens, but as long as it doesn't intrude on doing the enhancement of water, getting the habitat improved, we're all for the harassment of the animals and everything else. So please consider that. Thank you.
Beverly McGrath, representing Nevada Humane Society, Northern Nevada SPCA, Nevada Political Action for Animals, Paw Pack Action for Animals, Lake Tahoe Humane Society and SPCA, Compassion Charity for Animals, Tahoe Wolf Rescue, Tahoe Pet Network, and I hope I didn't forget any. We support this petition, and we hope that you move forward with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Purrier. Then you, Rex.
Jim Freer, representing myself. We already have the statute on harassing animals during flying. I think this is redundant. I think if this is a problem, the groups that want to really make an effect on this should help raise funds to hire some more wildlife wardens to go out and do that. Go out yourselves with a video camera, video it, find out who's doing it, and turn them in. It's already there. It's already illegal to harass animals by aircraft. So I think it's very, very redundant. I think the whole thing is you got to get out on the ground and get her done. Thank you.
Thank you. Rex?
Rex Flowers, Washoe County Cab. We did not support this. We felt it was too broad and that need to be narrowed down, be more specific. Having said that, I guess maybe we feel there is some merit, but we didn't care for the way it was written. On a personal note, I know several people who fly on a regular basis, and this would be an infringement right now on their right to fly. They're not harassing animals, but they are looking. I know one individual who this year did fly before the seasons, and he didn't fly to find animals. He flew to get a lay of the land, to find out what the terrain was. He was completely unfamiliar with where he drew his elk tag, and he was concerned. He wanted to get an overview, get an idea of the roadways, and then he went back and did his scouting on foot. Thank you.
Mr. Janae?
Jim Janae, Lyon County. We looked into this, had a good discussion, and we voted to go with it. And I think we put comments in there. Basically, it needs to be looked into. There are a lot of people out there that are doing a lot of good flying. They're not part of this. And I think we need to look at it long and hard of how we write it up, so we don't limit people's rights so much that they can't do something, but yet we don't need them out there trying to chase elk and knock horns off of them. It's going to be a ticklish situation. And I think we need to take it where we can get some discussion and come up with something so we can go into the future. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
For the record, Brett Jefferson with Nevada Bighorns Unlimited. We feel that this petition has merit, and we would recommend that the commission accept the petition and initiate the regulatory process. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission. Commissioner Lane?
Could we,
Could you grab the microphone?
could we ask Mr. Bonamici how much of an issue or how many citations we've had maybe over the last couple of years in terms of this particular portion of the legislation?
Rob?
For the record, Rob Bonamici, Chief Game Warden. Just a quick overview. There's not a year that goes by we don't receive complaints of people using aircraft to hunt. And keep in mind, that's also during this period of time which is currently stipulated as illegal to do that. So it's problematic to make those cases with as few officers as we have, and the time involved in surveillance to actually get the aircraft in the air and observe that activity. We have made cases, I'm going to say we average probably one a year or a little less than that we actually make. And those are made through either observation from hunters that are willing to testify, or from the seizure of videos that they take while they're committing this illegal activity. So that's it in a nutshell. As far as infringing on other people, legitimate flyers and so forth, we see that right now. We'll have ranchers flying, do low-level flying for cattle, what have you, during the period which it's illegal for a hunter to do it for purposes of scouting. And that's perfectly acceptable. It's a criminal violation, so it requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So that's our criteria and what we're held to in a court of law. So we can't just see a plane up there flying and chasing wildlife. It has to be for the purpose of hunting. That would alleviate the concern with the sheep guzzlers and so forth. If sheep are inadvertently moved, they're not filling the guzzlers for the purpose of hunting. They're filling the guzzlers for the purpose of providing water to the critters. So I'm comfortable with that. But any other questions, be glad to answer.
Commissioner Rain?
Thank you. The enforcement aspects of this additional period, it would just in general appear to me to be tougher to make a case outside of the season. Is that, what do you think of that?
It would be to some degree tougher to make a case outside the season, but by the same token, if they're doing it for sheds, they're harassing the wildlife, moving them, it'd be the same. We'd be looking at the same thing. I guarantee you most of them will come through citizens' complaints, other shed hunters complaining, other sportsmen complaining, and saying, hey, something needs to be done about this aircraft. I observed a red and white helicopter flying low, or a power parachute, or what have you. And so we'd have to go through the same steps. And if it's tied to shed hunting, that's another criteria. Right now, you can fly for sheds, even if there's an open season, which there aren't, but you typically could, you conceivably could. If you want to fly right now for sheds, for last year's sheds, you could do that.
And if I'd follow up on that, would be, okay, and if we're talking about possibly changing wording where currently it says for the purpose of hunting, then to add other words in there like scouting or pre-scouting or other criteria, how far are we getting away from the jurisdiction of this commission dealing specifically with wildlife as opposed to scouting. I mean, could it gone into things of scouting even when you don't have a tag? If we change that wording, where should we be?
It's covered under NRS 503.010. Would provide the commission some authority here under Section 3. It is unlawful to spot or locate game mammals or birds with any kind of aircraft or helicopter and communicate that information within 24 hours after the aircraft or helicopter has landed, or in violation of a regulation of the commission. So the commission has authority to address scouting, spot, and locate. That is what scouting is.
And how would that apply to, I mean, you could still go out and look at animals, obviously, but not, I mean, what's the difference between somebody go out and, to look at deer and somebody that's scouting to go hunting deer? How would you differentiate that? That seems...
It's going to be, those cases will more than likely, realistically, be made after the end of the season, where we have information that Rob Bonamici was out scouting, seen flying, and all that. We aren't able to prove it at that point in time. Rob Bonamici goes out, kills a really nice deer, and we end up having enough information for a search warrant, and that really nice deer is on video. And that's, in essence, how that case would be made.
Thank you.
Commissioner Young.
Chief, just for comparative purposes, other motorized equipment, how many citations or investigations do you do a year, perhaps for four-wheelers and people using those illegally, whether it's scouting, getting off the designated areas, tearing up the landscape, hunting sheds, you name it, the whole thing that I've seen them out there doing with four-wheelers?
Yep. Commissioner Young, with regards to four-wheelers, four-wheel drive pickups, what have you, the land-based equipment, those are used primarily for harassment of wildlife. And that's where we cite under that. We cite under the statute that I just recited. So there's Section 1. It is unlawful to molest, rally, stir up, or drive any game mammals or game birds with aircraft, helicopter, or motor-driven vehicle, and motorboats. So that's what we would cite under that. As far as destruction of habitat, that's a land management agency issue, BLM or Forest Service, and we turn those over to them. We don't have anything on the books currently that would allow us to cite under state law destruction of going cross-country on an ATV, for example.
Any other questions, Rob? Commissioner Drew?
Just so I'm clear, really what the petition is doing is expanding the time frame on which you can enforce kind of the current regulation. And then it also is asking to apply this regulation for no flying to shed antlers. Are those kind of what you view, Rob, as the two big changes?
Correct. That's what I view as the changes. If this had occurred prior to last legislative session, I would say that the commission doesn't have the authority to address sheds because they're not considered wildlife. But this last legislative session, that authority was put in the commission's hands through a legislative action. There's an NRS that allows for that now.
And then I guess my second question is, do you view this in any way as being redundant with the harassment codes and laws that you just kind of cited? I mean, I can see how it is in some case, but on the other hand, I kind of view it as being two separate issues in a lot of cases as well.
I view it as, you look at most our statutes and regulations, you'll see overlap in a lot of them. And you'll see where you have to look at multiple regulations, multiple statutes to make a case. And quite honestly, district attorneys, they go crazy with our statutes and regulations because you can't usually go to one and say, you violated this NRS, end of story. But there are many cases you can as well. But So to answer the question, what the regulation does, and they, in general, all of them do, is clarify further the authority provided in NRS. Or they clarify an illegal act that's in NRS, and they put some parameters on it. In this case, we have an NRS that says you can't fly, hunt from an aircraft, and so forth. The scouting, our current NAC regulation with regards to aircraft and the use of scouting lists criteria that are required to make the case, such as flying slowly at low altitudes, hovering, circling, or repeated flying. So there's an additional criteria set by the commission that further expands on the NRS. Well, I hope that answered your questions, but it's not a real easy answer.
Any further questions? Okay. That public comment period, we ran out of questions. Any questions of Corey? All right. Anybody got a motion? Commissioner Macbeth?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the petition of the Lincoln County Advisory Board to Manage Wildlife with regard to making it illegal to fly and harass big game, other wildlife, anytime after the year for purposes of scouting and hunting, and to fully vet that issue and initiate the regulatory process.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Yeah,
Commissioner Drew?
I had a little bit of discussion, just simply in terms of how we proceed. Rather than seeing the department jump right into drafting verbiage, I might suggest that we do, Chief Bonamici has been very good in the past with these sort of issues about giving us kind of a presentation before we direct staff to write regulations, so we understand kind of all the ins and outs of the issue. So I guess I would offer a friendly amendment that the department come back with a presentation to us so that we better understand this before we give them specific direction to draft language.
Okay, I'll accept the amendment.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a friendly amendment accepted and a second accepted it. Any further discussion? Commissioner Rain.
Might even want to consider, if providing this current motion does pass, committee. There's going to be a lot going on. Something to consider if it does pass, directing it on to pick a committee and doing it that way, and then the committee brings its report. No, it's going to be a lengthy thing. Thank you.
Just in regards to that, I considered the committee route, but I'm not sure what committee this would fall under, this particular item.
That's why we made him chairman.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well played, Scott.
Yeah, it's something that I could work with the secretary of the commission and figure out where to agendize it in the future and what route to go. So if we accept the petition, we could figure out the best way to move it forward after consulting with Director Mayer and Rob Bonamici. So, any more discussion? I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
Okay, motion passes. And you were a nay? Okay. 17,